The goal of this video is to break down the various components of an original oratory and show you how to construct them into a compelling outline. The best thing, though, that you can do to get a strong grasp over the various aspects of OO is to watch as many national finalist videos as possible. In fact, you shouldn't just be watching them passively, but studying them actively. You have access to all of these resources on speechanddebate.org, so you'd be a fool not to make good use of those resources. The more you study and start to break down the components of those speeches and analyze them and take notes, the better off you'll be able to construct a powerful speech all on your own. With that said, let's break down the various components of an OO outline. The first one, obviously, is the introduction. And you start off with the hook and transition. You've probably noticed that almost every OO starts off on a very lighthearted and humorous note. That's good. Now, I'm going to save most of my notes about the intro for a later video. I'm actually going to go into it in much more depth once you've actually started writing the speech. But it's important to start brainstorming ideas for the intro. Every speech should start with an entertaining opening vehicle to engage or hook your audience. That's why it's called a hook. It can be a personal anecdote, an analogy, a series of jokes, a story, an example, etc. You have a lot of room to be creative here. But the important thing is that you need something humorous, and it needs to be relevant to the topic. Sometimes I see people go up and try to crack jokes, and it has nothing to do with the topic, and then the transition to the topic feels very abrupt and forced, which causes your whole intro to feel corny. You should be able to transition smoothly to the topic without an abrupt leap in logic that leaves your audience scratching their head wondering how you went from point A, that intro hook, to point B, your topic. That transition needs to feel logical, seamless, and not overly abrupt. Again, I'm not going to go into too many examples right now. I'm going to save that for the next step of the writing process when you actually construct or transform your outline into a rough draft. But if you want to learn more at this point, my biggest tip is to watch as many national finalist OOs as you can. Next, still part of the introduction is the problem mindset. And this is when you define the overarching concept that will be developed throughout the whole speech. And hopefully this would have been developed during your topic proposal step. Almost all of you will have received feedback on how to improve your problem mindset, so be sure to incorporate that feedback into the outline. It is towards the end of the intro that you explain the topic of your speech, which is functionally your thesis statement, if you're thinking of this as an English essay. The typical format is, if we were to create a little formula, often we explain your mindset, and that's my concern. I fear that, and then you'll explain why the mindset now has terrible consequences on society. You've noticed that this always happens in OO in the intro. Now, you're not going to explain everything about your problem mindset right there. You're not going to explain its root causes right there, but you certainly forefront what the topic is going to be about and what problematic mindset you're going to be tackling. And then you end the intro by giving your audience a divided roadmap. And this typically draws on the figurative language of your hook. So if you're talking about dogs throughout your entire intro, then your divided roadmap would probably use the figurative imagery of dogs yet again to explain how the speech is organized. This is almost always in 3 steps, right? And now we'll unpack the way that the problem has affected society before packaging it back up to see what we can do and finally moving on to a new solution. You know, that's typically the tenor of a divided roadmap. The next section, the biggest section, is the problem mindset. And this, yet again, is a very difficult step of the OO process. It's just so complicated and abstract compared to many other speeches, so I'm going to be going into great depth here and showing you lots of examples to hopefully help you on your journey. So the first thing that needs to happen in this section is you need to explain why the problem mindset persists. And you need to explain why the problem mindset is pervasive and widespread. And part of that is actually proving that it's pervasive and widespread. Now first, when you're going into the root cause right here, you typically have a psychological, evolutionary, cultural, or historical reason for why the problem mindset has developed and continues. So let's take a look at Ashwin Pillai's speech. He was our team president in 2018-2019, and he finaled in original oratory on the state level. Now, his speech was all about how everywhere we turn, we're told we need to find our life's purpose. I believe I've mentioned this one before. Now, here's his explanation of why this mindset has taken off. I'm going to read verbatim from his speech. According to sociologist Dr. Robert Putnam, in the mid-20th century, the cornerstones of American society were strong community-based networks. But since then, things have changed. As technology became faster and smarter and more awesome, our lives became more digitized, more atomized, more individualized. Moreover, ethnographer M.P. Baumgartner found that rapid suburbanization in the country, in addition to the intense American emphasis on individualism and self-sufficiency, made people less likely to interact with even their neighbors, to form these communities in the first place. Looking at history, the changes in modern society have eviscerated the social groups that once provided us with ready sources of meaning. It is because of these changes that for the past several years, the dominant American ethos has been one of quiet isolation and self-restraint in the pursuit of a more private life. It is in this environment that the overwhelming cultural desperation for finding a quick and easy sense of purpose has kicked into high gear. So, hopefully you notice, this is primarily a historical explanation. As grand historical changes took place in American society, our values changed, which led to a mindset where we have an anxiety about finding our life's purpose. According to Oswin's speech, we have been isolated from traditional sources of meaning. We no longer have the community or senses of community that we used to have, so now we turn to quick and easy solutions to fill that void in our lives. Some other examples, right? In J.J. Kapoor's speech, he focused on the dangerous disconnects between stories and reality, and his explanation of the root cause of the mindset was all about how we are inherently storytelling creatures. He argued that we each seek to provide our scattered and confusing experiences with a sense of coherence by arranging the episodes of our lives into stories. And he brought in an expert who supported his claim by arguing that the storytelling mind, the human mind, is addicted to meaning. That it is human nature. Our brains are wired to find meaningful patterns in the world, otherwise we will impose them. So this explanation is much more about human psychology and how we're hardwired, as opposed to some historical explanation. In Hannah Watson's speech, The Quantum Society, she has an evolutionary explanation for why we tend to group things into in-groups and out-groups. She argues that we immediately and subconsciously categorize people into us and them categories, insiders and outsiders. And guess what? If you haven't seen the speech, that us and them mentality is going to be really problematic. It causes us to be biased and discriminate against certain groups of people as we subconsciously group them into us versus them. And she argued that this mindset developed from more primitive times, where it was a useful tool evolutionarily to make quick and instantaneous judgments about whether something was safe or whether it was going to try to kill us, right? If we had that ability to quickly and instantaneously and subconsciously categorize things into us or safe versus them, that's dangerous, not us, then we'd be more likely to survive. So we developed evolutionarily to be programmed to group people and objects in our world as insiders versus outsiders. So those are all different examples, and there's many more, but hopefully you're getting the flavor for the types of explanations you can provide for why your problem mindset developed. The next thing you need to do is to provide concrete examples of the way that your problem mindset is actually pervasive and widespread within society. And I think this is one of the most underrated but important parts of an OO. You don't want your audience to think that this mindset is just the problem of a few individuals, and certainly not them, right? Most people are not going to think that they are the perpetrators of a mindset that causes such egregious things like hate crimes and violence and sexism and racism. They're going to implicitly think that they are distant from that. But no, you want everyone to be implicated in it. Now, that doesn't mean you're accusing your audience of the most heinous atrocities that you'll discuss in your speech, but you want to persuade them that they are actually a part of that mindset, that they help to perpetuate it in less extreme instances, even if they don't fully realize it. You want them to believe that they could reasonably slip into that mindset, and that many people they know probably adopt that mindset. And the way you do this is by providing lots of examples of the way that people today embody this mindset. So you're not talking about here the harms or the negative consequences of the mindset at this point. You're just providing examples of how we all adopt this mindset at different moments. So while in the final speech form, this probably won't be a full section, it might even be integrated with other paragraphs, it's really important to brainstorm lots of examples early on in this outline stage because it'll help to clarify both for you and me what your topic is really about and what concrete examples you're going to be focusing on. So, the national champion this year, Harris, did this very effectively by weaving it throughout his harm section of his speech. There's not a paragraph devoted to this, but he cites tons of examples of the way that we oversimplify things in our world to sound bites and slogans. Whether it's commercials attempting to solve Black Lives Matter, or a governor drinking chocolate milk to prove his commitment to diversity, or the familiar arguments that we use to dismiss issues like climate change and gun violence, or statements like Hillary Clinton's, which simplify an entire group of people as, quote, a basket of deplorables, end quote. Right? He weaves in all of these examples and he gets to more serious problems, but all of those examples sprinkled throughout his speech really help to provide the audience with a clear sense of, oh, this isn't just certain individuals who might not be very intelligent. This is everybody, regardless of the political spectrum. These types of examples help to convince your audience that this mindset is pervasive and prevalent, that lots of people, even totally reasonable people, probably adopt this mindset. So a good question to ask when you're developing your topic, and especially this portion of your topic, is not, how does an extremist or a racist or a violent person embody my mindset? Nah, that's really easy. A much better question to ask is, how do average everyday people like my mom or my dad embody this mindset? And I promise you, almost 80% of problems with OO topics stem from a lack of thinking about this particular issue. A question I'll almost always pose to OOers as they're developing their topic is, how would I embody this? Or how would your parents embody this? And if you can't think of a good response there, it's probably a sign that your topic isn't very pervasive, isn't very prevalent, is either far too generic or far too specific. Next section is about harms and impacts. So after in that first section of the outline, you've established what your mindset is, how it developed, and more importantly, how it is prevalent and widespread in society, then you got to get to showing the devastating and negative consequences of the problem mindset. You need to show that these problems are serious and wide-ranging and ruining lives. And as I mentioned in the Developing a Topic video, you typically start with more lighthearted but nevertheless serious examples like political partisanship or pop culture examples, etc. And then you move to more serious problems like people dying or hate crimes, types of problems that you might want to talk about, especially early on. Money, either costing people a lot of money or wasting resources, government gridlock like partisanship, inequalities, infringement on liberty or human rights, and then eventually you can build to the really big ones like people dying or people being victims of traumatizing attacks like hate crime, sexual assault, etc. The most important part of these harms and impacts, though, it's very easy to talk about serious problems in society. The difficult thing and the most important thing you need to do is have a robust explanation of why and how your mindset is the root cause of these problems. This is far and away one of the biggest issues I see with freshman original oratories. I see speeches spend tons of time establishing the severity of a particular harm. How many people are affected, for instance, by police brutality? How many women are victims of sexual assault in America, for instance? And you'll do all of this data and analysis on how serious these problems are and how many people are affected by them. You'll incorporate experts and statistics, but then you'll only have one very weak line about how the mindset causes that problem. Guess what? Most of the harms you talk about, people know are serious. If you're talking about the opioid crisis, most people know that's a serious issue. If you're talking about gun violence, most people know that's a serious issue. If you're talking about sexual assault, most people know, again, that's a serious issue. The interesting part of the speech and the powerful and persuasive element of the speech is proving that your topic actually causes those serious problems. And so the link to your topic cannot be underdeveloped. It cannot be an afterthought at the end of your harm. You need to make it the focus point of each of your harms and have experts and evidence backing up your claim that the mindset is the root cause of the problem. So let's take a look at how Ashwin did this in his speech. And notice how good of a job he does at defining how his mindset, our quest for meaning, is the root cause of these bigger problems. We're going to look at two paragraphs of his speech. First one. For example, take Ricky Kaya, a postal service worker living in Quebec who was one of those individuals who felt that he desperately needed to find purpose or meaning, and he needed it soon. He said, the great social movements of the 1960s, the American civil rights movements, people today don't have that. And that, in the end, what people want is to be united with something bigger than them. Well, to fulfill that desire, Ricky joined Lemute, an anti-Islam hate group, through that very same Facebook initiative created to help people find meaningful groups in their lives. And this is more than just a wild coincidence. Sami Rangel, a former extremist himself and co-founder of the organization Life After Hate, argues that cults and hate groups specifically target people who are like Ricky, who desperately need some sense of purpose because they're the most vulnerable to the messages of supposed community and ideological simplicity pushed by those groups. In Rangel's own words, they're becoming part of something bigger and more meaningful than themselves. And that phrase right there is starting to sound scarily familiar. So hopefully you notice in that paragraph, Ashwin doesn't spend a ton of time going over why an anti-Islam hate group would be horrific. He doesn't establish a ton of data about how many Islamic individuals are targeted by hate crimes. It has enough power and weight in and of itself to get to that idea of an individual choosing to join a hate group. What he spends much more time on in this paragraph is establishing how and why his underlying mindset pushed someone like Ricky into that. And now let's look at this second paragraph. The United States has been facing an opioid epidemic. We consume 99% of the world's hydrocodone. Drug overdoses, especially involving opioids, kill more people in the U.S. than shootings and car crashes combined. And in 2017, heroin and fentanyl took more American lives than the entire Vietnam War. Dr. Susan Blumenthal, the former Assistant Surgeon General of the U.S., examined the areas most affected by the issue. And she found that in every instance, the rates of addiction and overdose always matched with a preceding trend in decreasing strength of community-based networks. The exact societal shift that has led to people feeling like they're missing out on meaning. But you don't have to take my word for it, because Dr. Blumenthal herself directly stated in the results of her findings that opioid addiction has become a disease of despair and a tragic manifestation of a loss of meaning. As people felt that they were losing their grasp on meaning in their lives, they reached out for something, anything, a narcotic, to fill that seemingly unacceptable void. So you can see here, this is a big moment in Ashwin's speech. He is accessing some of the biggest and most weighty and serious societal harms and impacts, right? More people dying than the entire Vietnam War combined. More opioid deaths than shootings and car crashes combined. I mean, this is serious. But notice, he doesn't get lost in just dropping a ton of impacts. Instead, he pivots and does a really good job of proving why those opioid deaths are actually linked to the exact phenomenon he's been talking about, the exact mindset he's been talking about throughout the entire speech. And now let's contrast this with a freshman rhetoric speech that I got a couple of years ago. And notice the lack of robust links here. Hopefully the contrast will help you to see exactly what not to do. And the reason I'm emphasizing so much of this is because this is, again, the biggest issue I see. So let's take a look. First, being apathetic to others' suffering has forced many people into bankruptcy. For example, a man by the name of Martin Shkreli is infamous for raising the price of Daraprim from $13.50 to $750 a pill. This drug has been the primary choice for those with weak immune systems, as well as the treatment for toxoplasmosis. Toxoplasmosis is known for causing fevers and muscle pain in minor cases, as well as brain inflammation and eye infections in more serious cases. As a result, people who needed the drug often were spending $75,000 for 100 pills. For low to medium income consumers, this could have caused bankruptcy. So look, this speaker's doing a good job of establishing a serious issue, right? That the raising cost of these pills has seriously affected certain individuals, and that there's an injustice there. The issue especially from this paragraph, you have no idea what his topic is. It's about being apathetic to others' suffering. Sorry, you might have an idea of what the topic is, but you don't have any clarity about why apathy is what caused this individual to raise the prices of his drugs. In all likely, it was about greed, right? Or profits. It's not necessarily about apathy. It's certainly not self-evident that it's about apathy. And so this speaker needs to do a lot more to establish that his topic is a root cause. Let's take a look at another example, one about bullying. And the speech was about a lack of empathy for others. But let's take a look at whether or not this establishes the root cause. To be more specific, bullying, which is caused by the lack of empathy for another person, is one of the leading causes of suicide. According to statistics reported by ABC News, nearly 30% of students are either bullies or victims of bullying, and 160,000 kids stay home from school every day because of the fear of bullying. Yale University reports that bully victims are 2 to 9 times more likely to commit suicide than those who have never been bullied before. With 44,000 people dying each year from suicide, we can see that apathy is a major problem. Now notice, he opens up with a lack of empathy and ends with apathy. He throws in those words about his topic, but do you feel persuaded that bullying stems from apathy and empathy issues? Not necessarily, and hopefully you notice that a speech like this would feel very generic. You wouldn't feel like you're learning anything new. You'd feel like somebody is giving you a very boring sermon. Instead, I think this speaker would have to do a lot better job of going into the psychology of bullies and showing how the feeling of a lack of empathy is actually what propels them to project those emotions and start bullying. But none of that work is done. So hopefully you can see the difference between what Ashwin was doing and what this freshman rhetoric speech was doing, and that way you can avoid it. The easiest way to lose points on this outline will be to do exactly what this freshman did and not provide good explanations for why your topic is the root cause of your impacts. Next section is dramatic impacts. And hopefully from watching OOs, you've gotten a sense for what goes on here, right? This is the big, dramatic, emotional, weighty moment. It's still an impact. It's still a consequence of your problem mindset. The only difference is you provide it a lot more space. It's more developed than the others. It's typically a full paragraph. Sometimes this can be a personal example, like it was with JJ's example about mistaking his father for Osama bin Laden and the hate crimes his father experienced in the wake of 9/11. Or they can be societal, like Ashwin's speech, where the dramatic example comes from the severity of the harms, of the severity of the opioid crisis. Or in Hannah Watson's speech on the us versus them mindset, the dramatic example ends up being the Rwandan genocide. The point, though, is that this example is much more fleshed out than your other examples, and when you finally write it into a full speech, you give it dramatic rhetoric that brings your audience from a purely analytical place to a more emotional place. In order to persuade an audience, you always want to affect both their head and their heart. The final section is the solution. And the solution is typically a new mindset, a different way of approaching or thinking about things. Or perhaps if this mindset is hardwired into us, then it's a change in our actions that help us to get around our hardwiring, our programming. The important thing here is that you have an expert, typically somebody who specializes in psychology, who advocates for your solution. You can't just come up with something on your own. You need a credible source to back you up. OO solutions already sound pretty vague and generic, and so you got to make sure that it doesn't sound too much like a magic wand. This is a big place that a lot of people have qualms with original oratory. They'll agree with all the harms, they might agree with the mindset, but they'll think that it just feels too wishy-washy to say snap our fingers and stop thinking like that. So it's important you explain why the solution mindset would solve for the issues that you've outlined. It's not enough to simply say, let's do this. Look, someone smart agrees with me. You need to explain the logic of why it'd work. If you have any concrete examples of it working or how it'd work, that's great, because OO solutions can often sound overly vague. You want to make sure your solution doesn't feel like a magic wand with absolutely no basis in reality. Then you typically end with a call to action, urging your audience to change and inspiring them to work to fix this problem mindset. And let's take a look at Ashwin's OO, his final section. However, research by University of Missouri psychologist Samantha Heintzelman suggests that for far too long we have been overlooking another facet of meaning, something that comes from within ourselves. Heinzelmann found that genuine meaning can be drawn from the coherent factors of our daily life. But coherence? That's vague, even for an oratory. The researchers identified several concrete actions that empirically helped people realize they were living unified and meaningful lives. They were those small rituals that ground us, like starting to keep an organized daily schedule, taking the same route to work every morning, and having a daily tradition like sitting down every evening to have little talks around a boring dinner table. It might seem simple, but qualitative scientific studies have proven that it's not only more effective, but also so much less dangerous than desperately reaching outward for an ideology, for a welcoming group, for a narcotic, for something external. In a world with less social infrastructure, finding meaning requires us to find joy in the consistent actions that shape our lives, to treasure the valuable moments no matter how small and insignificant they might seem, to embrace the mundane. And if you view those mundane discussions around a boring dinner table with as much apprehension as I once did, well, join me. Take a seat. Strike up a conversation. And maybe you'll learn to love it too. So hopefully you see here, Ashwin does something really clever. He opened up his speech by actually joking around, making jokes about not wanting to sit at the dinner table with his mom and dad after school because he was so focused on doing homework and finding the meaning in his life. But he brings that back around in a very concrete way to saying, hey, something as simple as sitting down at a dinner table every night and having conversations can actually provide us with a sense of meaning in our lives. And he has good support here, right? He has direct psychologists, he has experts that he weaves in, and it feels very much well supported by experts as opposed to just Ashwin, and he provides the internal logic very well. So hopefully you see what a good example of a solution looks like. So my final thoughts. Like I said at the beginning of this video, the best way to master these ideas is to practice by watching national finalists. So to that end, this week you'll be watching national finalists and filling out the OO components worksheet. Hopefully by putting these speeches into an outline form on a visual worksheet, you'll come to internalize these various components a little bit better. And just a quick note. There's no one way to organize an OO speech. So these components do not always appear in chronological order. And part of this exercise will be to force you to think critically about which box each of these particular speech best fits, or which bullet point, even if it's not in the same order that I've put them on the page. There's a lot of variety and freedom with OO. So don't take this outline this outline structure as meaning this is exactly how you have to integrate and organize your speech every single time, right? There's some liberty here. All I'm trying to do is teach you the underlying components so that you have clarity about what your task is as an original orator. I hope this video helped. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out.